now we're back with our second panel. We are going to talk about EU Inc. Europe has a lower number of startups, and too few among them grow fast and eventually become large companies. Also, more unicorns from Europe migrate to the US than vice versa. This has a lot to do with the lack of venture capital in Europe, but also with regulation, as we already heard. Especially the lack of a pan-European legal entity. That is something EU Inc. wants to change, so we're going to talk about that. And therefore, I would like to introduce my panelists. They are already all on stage here. That is so great. So over there, we have Nils Behrndt, Deputy Director-General in the Directorate-General for Justice and Consumers at the European Commission. We also have Evgenia Plotnikova. She is an investor from the venture capital firm Dawn Capital, based here in Brussels, and she is also the youngest woman in Europe to be internally promoted to GP, to general partner, and that is just amazing. I'm inclined to ask about your age, but I'm not going to do that. I need that. Next to her, we have Hayley Halvarsson, and she is the lead of Stripe Atlas, a platform designed to help entrepreneurs to establish businesses. And Andreas Klinger, he will tell us all about EU Inc. He is an investor via his microfund Prototype Capital, but nowadays in Europe, the face of EU Inc., a proposal on a pan-European entity for startups. And last but not least, Fredrik Hjelm. He co-founded Voi, the e-scooter company, in 2018 and has shaped Europe's micro-mobility market. And a fun fact, he has studied Russian. I don't know if it's such a fun fact, but yeah, here we go.
So, I think it's fun.
It may be a little less fun today, huh?
Yeah, probably. So maybe we start with Nils Behrndt. I would just like to know about the current state of affairs when it comes to EU Inc. and the 28th. I don't have that here, so sorry for that. But about the state of affairs of the EU startup and scale-up strategy. That would be great if you could just give us a short introduction there.
Sure, my pleasure. First, thanks for inviting. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, as you said, Europe is full of talent, is full of very entrepreneurial colleagues, and we have a beautiful single market. But still, we don't succeed to scale up sufficiently and keep those talented young entrepreneurs in Europe to really become successful. That's why the von der Leyen II Commission is determined to move forward to address this issue. That's nothing that we in DG Justice alone can do. We are in charge of company law, incorporation, but to support this kind of scale-up effort really requires a coordinated support from different areas. That will include the innovation colleagues working on the European Innovation Act to explain what kind of companies are we talking about, what kind of support measures do we need. That will include, of course, colleagues from the financial service to make sure that venture capital is made available. That will include also efforts from the side of digital policy to make sure that companies, when they're operating cross-border, can easily be identified, the business wallet. So those are just a few elements that clearly have to go in. Of course, and that's something which we found very interesting from the invaluable input that EU Inc. is providing, also the setting up of a company in Europe and operating cross-border is too complicated. So our vision is that you can set up a company fully digital within a few days, perhaps within one day, at one-stop shop, ideally in English, that you have an EU brand and that you have an EU certificate to really be visible in the entire union, visible for investors, and that you can operate very freely. Again, this effort will require contributions from different sides. We are reflecting internally with different policy areas and DGs in the Commission on this specific company law part. We will start a public consultation in May, probably for 2 months. And then the idea is to come with a legal proposal in March next year. By then, we will have a couple of other building blocks. So for example, on the financial services, the savings and investment unions is already out. The startup scale-up strategy will come relatively soon. So let's say there are different building blocks in the making. The company law part, we will start the consultation in May and then come with a proposal next year.
Andreas, are you a part there?
Sorry,
In that? Are you part in the whole setup?
So we are in a fortunate position that we are meeting with the Commission now, like with parts of the Commission at DG, just for example, almost like on a weekly, every other week basis. And there is a lot of details to get right, so the time is very much needed.
Hayley, does it all sound outdated to you when someone is telling you, well, yeah, we're aiming for the possibility to set up a startup in a few days? So maybe you could introduce Atlas to us so that we know what you're doing there.
Sure. Atlas is a Stripe product that we built back in 2016, and the goal was really to make it easier to start a startup from anywhere in the world. So where we stand today, over 70,000 companies have started on Atlas, and founders from over 180 countries have used Atlas. In fact, about 10% of our users come from Europe. And these are all people who are just looking for a standard way to set up a company that they know will then enable them to raise funding if that's what they want, and has a recognized standard. So we set up companies in Delaware, a state in the US, which is known to be a kind of standard and understood way to set up your company. And practically what Atlas looks like to a founder is it's an online form that takes about 5 minutes to fill out. And within a day, you have a company that's incorporated, you are ready to open a bank account, you're ready to start charging customers, you can start fundraising. And then there are a few other things that take a little bit longer, but they're handled. We take those and make sure that some important tax filings are executed on your behalf. Behind the scenes, though, what's actually happening is much more complex. And so the reason Atlas exists is because we wanted to abstract away and simplify for founders what are a set of quite complex and sometimes lengthy processes that if you're doing it yourself, it could take you weeks or months. People opt to hire lawyers sometimes, and it costs thousands and thousands of dollars. And so from founder's perspective, 5 minutes, but the US system is far from perfect, and Atlas was built to simplify it so that a founder can get back to building their business.
Does it still sound like a dream to you, Andreas?
As somebody who worked on similar solutions, it's doable. So like it's not a dream. The main issue we have in Europe is not that company law A, B, C, or D is not like Delaware, for example. The main issue we have A, B, C, D company law up to the full alphabet, like quite literally. The main problem we have here is you couldn't right now set up something like Stripe Atlas, because each country would require their own legal entity, each country has like this own little quirks and so on and so on. So just implementation-wise, it would be a horrible headache. And I personally have the conspiracy theory that Stripe did this just to convince everybody to just use Delaware and like be done with it. The other issue as a founder is like, so for example, my case, when I started my very, very first startup, we formed an Austrian GmbH. And we spent weeks with lawyers to make sure it's ready for international investors. It was in English and German. It had all kinds of clauses that Austrian lawyers have never heard about at that point. The first thing that the international investor asked us is to reincorporate, because they won't get any follow-on investor to actually take the time to understand Austrian law. There's no way that anybody's doing it nowadays. I'm an investor myself. I have invested in more than 100 companies. Standards is what gives me confidence. It allows me to accept an email. I see it's a Delaware. I see it's a YC safe note. I click a button and I can just trust this. I don't even have to send it to my lawyer. For me, right now, it's easier to invest in companies in Brazil than to invest in companies in Europe, because I do not have to worry about any local gotchas. There might be no preferred stock. There might be certain tax implications. There might be certain implications and so on that I just don't know about in Lithuania, in Slovenia, in France. And I, for early stage investing, don't have the time or willing to learn all of that, or even, like, to be frank, I can't. And even if I could, every time I would have to work with local lawyers, local tax advisors, and so on and so on. This is for me, like, I'm very comfortable. So for example, I invested in Gabriel's company, like, who has been on stage before. To me, this is very easy to do if there's a lead investor who already puts in several million of dollars. Like, I will just trust this lead investor who have done this properly.
Well, in his case, it was Sequoia, wasn't it? So
in his case, he was very humble. Like, they're ex-Stripe, ex-OpenAI, and a few other degrees. They could have asked every investor to prove that they can bake a baguette, and still every investor would have, like, baked a baguette in front of them to just join that round. Like, if you are successful enough, investors will do everything and you will have a big lead. If you're a first-time founder, or if you're, like, trying to get your very first angel check, in America, you leave your job, you go to Stripe Atlas, you start a company, and you send a safe note to an angel who believes in you, and they wire like 100, 200K, and you can get going. This in Europe right now is not feasible in practice.
well, Fredrik, somehow you were able to found a very successful company in Sweden. So would it have been easier with EU Inc. in place, or what were the hurdles?
Yeah, so Voi is today operating in 150 cities all over Europe, and I am the legal representative on the board in 16 subsidiaries in 16 different European countries. So I live and breathe and unfortunately cry about this quite a lot. And first, on Andreas' point about investing, because I do some angel investing as well, I think an important nuance, it was in the previous conversation as well, is that there is not a lack of capital in Europe anymore. There is definitely not a lack of capital. There is European capital, there is a lot of American capital, there is Middle Eastern capital, and so on. What we lack to attract more investments into startups is what Andreas is talking about now, standards, a unified framework, and so on. So that's on investing. When it comes to running a company in all these different countries, all these different cities, it's pretty much the same there. What we need is a very unified framework. I have to handle 16 different VAT taxonomies, accounting rules. The worst thing of it all, labor law. And the further south you go in Europe, the more messy it is. It's relatively easy to hire. It's almost impossible to fire. And that is not a good foundation if you have to build fast, take risk, raise money, and so on. You get stuck. Overall, where it's working really well in Europe, 2 countries stick out, and they are also the countries with most unicorns and decacorns per capita. It's Sweden and it's Estonia. And I think you need 3 things to be a successful startup ecosystem. One, you need a culture where it's allowed to be successful. Like, you want a culture where people encourage entrepreneurs, encourage Olympic medalists, and so on. So that's one thing. The second thing, density of talent and capital. And now we're starting to have the density in some places in Europe, Stockholm, London, Berlin, Paris, Tallinn, and so on. And Munich, of course. Munich is Zurich. Now we're starting to have the density of people who have built big companies, they have scaled big companies, and want to build again or give back. And the third thing is regulations. From tax to employee incentive programs to labor law and so on. If you have those 3 things, which both Sweden and Estonia have, things are typically going quite well. And also, back to Sweden and Estonia. In Sweden and Estonia, you can set up a company. I can set up a company now and have a new company in 2 hours. It's all digital. It's the same in Estonia.
Evgenia, do you like to invest in Estonian companies so far? No, but you're financing global software leaders. So would that be easier with EU Inc. in place?
We will fund startups in Estonia or wherever talent comes from. I think at Dawn, we very much believe that there is no geographic monopoly on talent. It can come it can be in Tallinn, it could be in Lisbon, it can be in Berlin, it could be in Munich. And the cost of creation of a startup has dropped significantly over the years, right? It used to cost 5 million in the 90s, and it was $500,000 in the early 2000s. Today, you've got 50K, you can work with Stripe, with OpenAI, and you're off and running. I think fundamentally, it is fantastic to have initiatives like EU Inc. It is fantastic to harmonize and create frameworks. I think that is incredibly useful for inception. But I think where we may face further challenges, it's on the scale-up journey, and I think that has been evoked a little bit on the prior panel, because it's one thing to create and to attract initial funding and initial talent. It's a whole another one to try and expand across Europe. And the reason a lot of our companies end up going to the US is because it's the single largest global buyer of software as a single market. It is easier to purchase software, whether you happen to be in Delaware, whether in New York, in San Francisco, in Atlanta, Georgia. And I would love for that to be the case also for Europe. I would love for that to also be the case, as Joan evoked on the prior panel, for people to be more mobile across European Union. And that comes to employment laws and tax laws and other regulation that goes beyond the inception stage, where I think there's still a lot of progress and a lot of strides to be made. And I agree that there is a lot more early stage funding today, but I am yet to see a number of growth stage European funds that can write $100 million check for Voi or for Just Who Are Just Here.
Yes, especially with all the deep tech companies, it would be really necessary to have such a growth fund in Europe. Yeah.
Can I quickly add something?
Yeah, sure.
So this is a very, like I share the sentiment. There's a very common saying, we don't have a startup problem, we have a scale-up problem in Europe. So we don't have enough scale-up capital. I genuinely believe we have an early stage momentum problem. We don't have enough companies reaching escape velocity quickly enough. And the main reason is because all the early steps are incredibly tedious, and it's absurdly hard to scale. For example, like in the case of consumer startups, it's extremely hard to scale from country to country. I hope for more growth funding, but I also believe if you would have more companies that hit absurd escape velocity, there is more reason to create them. And the other thing that we are fundamentally lacking, and which I will definitely not start an initiative for, so if somebody wants to, is let's say a joint solution across Europe how to actually IPO. Because right now I'm investing, if you as a founder would actually IPO in Europe, I would wonder if the board will sue you, because there is just not enough capital on European stock exchanges compared to the States. So this is like, we basically have limitations on each layer of the stack. But yeah, my main concern right now, personally, is always like early stage momentum. This is like where I see most of my founders.
I agree, but this is why I say sort of a scaling is a pan-European scaling. I absolutely agree with you, and I do think right now is what's happening is interesting, and I loved Gabriel's comment about Trump being the biggest sort of European promoter, and I agree, do not waste a good crisis, right? Like, let's take advantage of this opportunity, and yes, perhaps further down the line that exits are also an opportunity, and I think it goes beyond the depth of the capital markets, which is absolutely a problem, but also ability of the European corporates to purchase innovation, right? How many M&A transactions of scale have we seen that are led by European corporates? And I think it would be a phenomenal opportunity for us to also execute on that.
So Nils, how is the European Commission going to make the most out of this current crisis?
Well, I find the discussion very interesting because it shows that there is not one single problem, and also there is not one single solution. We have in the scale-up phase probably different challenges than in the startup phase, but we have, let's say, we have challenges in both areas. What we clearly want to do is what Andreas also mentioned, to make sure that companies, but also investors, have this known identity in the union. Whether we then call it EU Inc., whether we call it, give it a different name, but we want to have an EU brand, for sure. And of course, all the setting up should be as easy as we discussed. The question is a bit, and that's something we still will have to reflect on also after getting further input, do you really want to create a company of form at EU level? Because for that, we would require under the treaties unanimity. And we have one European company form, and we negotiated 30 years to set it up. We don't have 30 years. So there is a crisis now, there is a challenge, we need to react fast. Reacting fast means we have to go for qualified majority, proposal early next year, and then rapid negotiation and adoption. But that also means that we will probably not create a EU-level company form, but we will have to harmonize a company form which is offered under national laws. It still would have the European brand, therefore, let's say, would be recognizable. The question then is, how far do we go beyond pure company law? So labor law has been referred to taxation. For sure, there are lots of things which can be done to facilitate the life of companies in Europe in terms of taxation, for example. A tax identification number that you can use in different member states. It does not mean that you have to overhaul the entire corporate taxation system, because overhauling the entire corporate taxation system, again, unanimity. So we will have to see what precisely those great innovative startups scaled up need, and then see how we can find a politically feasible way. Company law, again, harmonized qualified majority. Financial services, absolutely yes. On labor and taxation, we will have to look very carefully. For example, the EU Inc. idea for a stock option plan, very interesting. Doesn't require probably labor law. It probably will require, to make it attractive, some tax incentives. So there we will have to see how can we give those kind of tax incentives to make it attractive in the market. But that's precisely the way we want to explore.
Would you like to add something, Andreas?
Yeah. So just to clarify a few things for the people in the audience, because EU Inc. We were quite successful with the marketing, so at that point it almost became a meme for 28th regime. 28th regime is like cloud computing. It's like an approach how to solve something. EU Inc. is a very specific solution where we went with Auric, Behrndt, like the best legal teams in Europe, and tried to figure out all the details. And for example, this whole discussion of how do you get the member states to actually agree on this is one of the make or break on this whole thing. And right now there's three mindsets around this. One is get everybody to agree, and the other one is do something with a subgroup of states. And this is currently the go-to-market discussion, more or less. One thing that we with EU Inc. try to suggest is to keep intentionally tax and employment law out of it, and only focus on standardization of incorporation, stock options, and investments, so corporate law. And the reason why we do this is not because we think this would be perfect, but we think this is something that could actually, in very reasonably time, quickly pass on, multiple countries could very quickly agree on this without having the problem of 100 cooks killing the idea, essentially. The thing is that we suggest is to still have those harmonizations, but as separate programs. So basically say, there's an EU Inc. that's for anybody, you can start a coffee shop and you can take an EU Inc. if it's beneficial to you, and I personally know people that became millionaires by investing in coffee shops companies. But for these special harmonizations that we maybe only want to allow a niche so that the local tax authorities don't get a panic attack, that should have their own program, own rule sets, who can join. And by splitting this, you make the decision how to get it quickly to market easier, but you also make a lot of other things less complicated. So for example, what happens if a company is no longer 3 years old, or what is actually an innovative company, or what is actually a fast growing company, and so on and so on. All these discussions that you can keep them on the program, special program area, and then also decide what happens when they no longer qualify. So this is a very specific thing. So EU Inc. Is one very specific solution. And for example, one thing we also push for is to centralize as much as possible. So one specific corporate law across Europe, one registry, and so on and so on. The idea behind this is so that companies like Stripe or Stripe Atlas or similar companies could create third-party solutions. If they have to dock into 20, 30 registries in Europe, which have implemented everything a little bit different, you're back to square one.
Which is an excellent point, and one of the reasons why we haven't built Stripe Atlas in Europe. Yep. It would be enormously complex with the current regulatory system.
But would you think about that if EU Inc. would be in place? Would it be something?
I think this is why I'm invited.
Good to know.
I mean, our hope is that we don't have to.
Yeah.
Our hope is that we don't have to build Stripe Atlas in Europe. Our hope is that there's this opportunity to do it right and kind of build the system that works to support entrepreneurship. And if the right policy is in place, that enables the government to do what Estonia did and build that for a pan-European audience.
What kind of advice do you have for the initiators of EU Inc.? So is there something from your experience that's definitely worthwhile pushing, that should be integrated? What's the main thing there?
All the themes that have been brought up are ones that are very close to home. As I mentioned, about 10% of Atlas users are Europeans. So this year, we'll probably set up about 2,000 European startups. And so what I mean by that is European founders who want to set up their company in the US. So we hear a lot from them about why, and it's exactly this. It's I want to set up in the U.S. because I want access to fundraising. So how do you make it easy for that to be true for someone based in Europe to set up a company in Europe and feel like they will have that first investor ready to give them a check so they can get going. I want to set up in the U.S. because I feel like I understand it. It's easy, it's predictable, it's online, it's cheap. And as I mentioned with Atlas, I can spend 5 minutes filling out a form, and then I get back to thinking about my company, because that's where my brain power should really be going. And then finally, we hear a lot about taxation and the tax incentives that come with being a US-based founder. As I mentioned, that system certainly isn't perfect either. There are a lot of things you have to do to ensure that you secure those tax incentives. So Europe could do an even better job there by just making that all automatic for founders.
Evgenia, do you, hearing all these things, you are looking at pitches each day. So does it play a role when it comes to a decision how and where the startup is located?
No, absolutely not. I think, again, as I mentioned, we think there is no geographic monopoly on talent. I think great opportunities, great startups can be created anywhere. And I think, fundamentally, I'm delighted to see the initiatives where it might be easier to start the company. I would love to see the initiatives where it's easier to expand across Europe and take advantage of the market. And hell, maybe bring more US talent here to Europe, right? Perhaps going back to not wasting a good crisis, maybe that's also our opportunity to attract international talent here. And maybe it is challenging to have member states adopt specific rules about employment law, taxation, but perhaps EU Inc. could think around a framework for international expatriates coming here, setting up here, helping them with the visas, or helping them with a pan-European tax system, whatever place they choose to be in, as an MVP or sort of an initial project to help us take advantage of the deglobalization trend that seems to be occurring, to attract some top-tier researchers or startup workers to here.
Fredrik, I know that you would like to talk about mindset as well here at this panel, because, well, you've just told me that this is one of the reasons why we might have a few more problems than other countries here in Europe, or wherever we are based. So, yeah, what's your point of view there?
No, because how I see companies and overall societies is that, everything we're talking about, technicalities, rules, and so on, is downstream from your values, culture, and mindset. And I think for me, especially over the last week, so a week ago was a dinner with the Swedish Prime Minister and 10 company builders and so on. It was the same night as Trump announced the tariffs. And the conversation on that dinner was very much like, the US is so bad, the US is so bad, this is like a divorce and so on. While I think it's a much better mindset, instead of thinking, the US owes us support, they owe us funding, they owe us defense. Instead, what can we contribute? The US doesn't owe us anything. No one owes us anything. We need to stand on our own legs, take responsibility for our defense, our regulations, our companies, our culture. And through that, I think we can put Europe back into some kind of golden era. I mean, if you look at what we have, it's amazing. We have the German industrial engine. We have Nordic, Paris, London, and other tech hubs. We have French food and wine. We have the most beautiful cities, beautiful nature, and so on. We have so much to be proud of. And also, I think, the main asset we have is we have 500 million incredibly talented, incredibly diverse Europeans. So to all politicians and entrepreneurs and others who somehow can influence society, I mean, what we need to do now is really to unleash the collective creativity and power of those 500 million. And we won't do it through thinking that the US or anyone else owes us something. We need to think, how can we contribute? Then I think we will have great partnerships with the US and any other country we want to partner with.
Look, I agree. I think the point for me personally is we want to fund innovation and talent wherever it comes from in Europe. I think we want our companies to expand to the US, we want them to expand to Asia, we want them to be pan-European as well. I think fundamentally there is a shift around mentality around failure. I think in Europe for a long time we were embarrassed of failure. I think there is a shift in mentality around celebrating success, perhaps not over-regulating success when success becomes true, and we create our first $1 trillion company, and then it doesn't matter whether it was in Stockholm or in Paris or in Lisbon that the company was created, it will be a global success.
Is there also already a change of mindset recognizable in the European Commission?
Well, I can only subscribe to what Fredrik was saying. Let's say Europe is incredibly rich in terms of talent, in terms of culture. And let's say we want to make sure that we can use the single market for success in Europe. That doesn't mean that we need the same identical legislation and policy and mindset in all the member states. You may have different poles of intelligence, of entrepreneurship. And that's okay. We just want to make sure that regulation is not standing in the way, but that it promotes innovation. Also, if you fail, that then you can close the shop and start again. That clearly is critical. So therefore, Europe has indeed a lot to offer. Change of mindset. We are absolutely committed to promote this kind of innovation. And we also feel the spirit shared in the European Parliament, in the Council. So I'm very optimistic that Europe can stand up to the opportunity which we have, and indeed also assume full responsibility. We have an incredibly strong single market that we have to use. We must make sure that everybody who wants to succeed in Europe can succeed and doesn't go elsewhere.
Hayley, you're not living in Europe. You're living in the US. So from an outsider point of view, what do you propose? What should we do here in Europe? What should we change, and where should we look at first?
I don't know that I'm in a position to propose, but I think everything that I've heard today gives me a lot of confidence that people are having the right conversations. And it really all comes back to just figuring out what is hardest for founders and piece by piece how you can solve that. So I think if I had any piece of advice, I would just encourage the people who are setting policies and the people who are supporting them to just spend a lot of time talking to founders, asking them why things were hard, why they decided to go elsewhere when they chose to set up their business, and figuring out how to ease some of those difficulties.
I'm trying not to make the mood too bleak now. I genuinely,
but you will.
Yeah, genuinely, just to change a little bit of vibe, I genuinely believe we have 10 years to be sovereign, fully. And startups are tech innovation and a crucial part of sovereignty. I think this is very obvious when it comes to drone warfare, because we need the batteries, we need the minerals, we need the quadcopters, we need the AI locally to actually have that. And if our suppliers and our supply chain is not more innovative than a competitor, then you have a problem directly at the front line. So that's just dev tech itself, but this is true for literally every industry. This is true for energy, for example. We have seen with Russia what it means if you're dependent on an outside force on something as infrastructural as energy. This is true for literally any part as well. The big issue we have right now in Europe is that in almost every industry, thanks to the internet as perfect distribution channel, there's 1 to 3 companies that dominate a market. And these companies right now usually are in the States. They're not here, they're in the States. And you can hope that the next president in the States is a big Europe fan. Realistically, it will be Vance, and afterwards we will have most likely a left populist, and so on and so on. I think that Trump pretty much opened up a new chapter, and what we as Europe need to do is to get to the point where it doesn't matter what China, India, Russia, or America is doing. And to do that, we need to get fully sovereign. And the big mistake that we keep doing in Europe is we think of startups as SMB, small, little, innovative companies. They're great for photo ops. You can go there, make a few nice pictures, and then you leave. This is not what startups are. I have invested in 100 companies. I have to admit some of them stayed small, but that's not the reason why I invested in them. I invest in companies so that they get big. And the problem we have is we can't say, yes, Europe is different, we don't want big tech, blah, blah, blah. We are more like, in Germany they call it Mittelstand. That's not true. We have big pharma, we have big car, we have all of them. We have big trade, big bank, big telco. We had all of those. We just don't have them in tech. And the reason is, for the first time ever, the internet acts as a distribution channel that perfectionize power law. So any little advantage you have compounds. Any disadvantage creates the opposite effect. And what we right now need to do to actually make tech innovation work is like fix literally every layer, from like starting to exit, and in every industry. And additionally, where I highly agree with, we need to switch in Europe to a mindset of encouraging hyper-ambitious people. And step one is like creating sanctuaries for them, where like 5 people who are hyper-ambitious can just meet on a daily basis and like do their thing. And then hopefully, step by step, we change the whole society.
Seems to be a good proposal. Do you agree?
Just last
Fredrik?
thought here. This is only possible on continental scale. There is no Belgian solution against China. Okay? Just.
So, are you also for a European solution? Are you in favor?
I agree with the previous speaker.
And we are running out of time, so Andreas, it was you who had well the final words here. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining this panel. I think it was a great discussion, and we'll just have to get back to it in 1 year or 2 years to see where we are then. Now we are almost at the end of this event, but not yet. But first of all, well, I think you have to leave the stage and thanks again.